Now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You will hear two university students discussing the preparation of a group presentation on renewable energy for one of their environmental science modules. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer the questions 21 to 25.
Hi Daniel, thanks for meeting this afternoon. I thought it would be useful for us to go through our presentation before we meet with our tutor tomorrow.
Definitely. I've brought my notes and I also looked over the feedback from our proposal. Overall, it was positive, but there are a few areas we need to improve before we prepare the final presentation.
Yes, I noticed that. The tutor liked our choice of renewable energy because it's a current issue, but she said our focus was still a bit too broad.
Exactly. At first, we planned to cover solar, wind, hydroelectric, and geothermal energy. But trying to explain all four in 15 minutes would leave us with very little time for analysis.
I agree. Instead of giving a brief description of every renewable technology, perhaps we should compare just two of them in greater depth.
That sounds more realistic. Which two do you think would work best?
I was thinking solar and wind energy. There are plenty of reliable academic sources, and both technologies have developed rapidly during the last decade.
I like that combination. Originally, I wondered whether hydroelectric power would be more interesting, but most of the recent journal articles we found focused on solar panels and wind farms. It would probably be easier to support our arguments with stronger evidence.
That's true. We also need to explain why renewable energy is becoming more important rather than simply describing the technology itself.
So perhaps we could begin with a short introduction about climate change, increasing energy demand, and the need to reduce carbon emissions before moving on to the comparison.
Yes, but we shouldn't spend too long on the background. Most people in the class already understand the basic reasons for using renewable energy.
Good point. We can keep the introduction to about 2 minutes and then move into the main discussion.
I've also been thinking about how we divide the presentation. Would you prefer to explain solar energy while I cover wind energy?
Actually, I wondered if it might flow better if one of us introduced both technologies first, and then the other compared their advantages and limitations.
Could you explain what you mean?
Well, instead of repeating similar information separately, we could organise it by theme. For example, you could introduce both technologies and explain how they generate electricity. Then I'd compare installation costs, efficiency, environmental impact, and long-term maintenance.
Oh, I see. That would avoid unnecessary repetition. I was worried the audience might lose track if we kept switching between topics.
Exactly. It should also make the presentation sound more connected.
Another thing we need to decide is whether to include a case study. We collected information about a university campus that recently installed solar panels, but we also found an interesting report about an offshore wind project.
I think one detailed example is probably enough. The offshore wind project includes more recent data and gives us clearer statistics to discuss, so I'd choose that one.
I agree. The figures are easier to interpret and they support our conclusion more effectively.
Great. So we've decided to focus on solar and wind energy, organise the presentation by themes rather than technologies, and use the offshore wind project as our main example.
That sounds like a solid plan. Tonight, I'll revise the introduction and prepare the diagrams, while you can update the comparison table and check that all the references follow the correct university style.
Perfect. I'll also double-check that the data comes from the latest research papers rather than older reports.
Now you have some time to read questions 26 to 30 before you hear the rest of the conversation. Now listen carefully and answer the questions 26 to 30.
While you do that, I'll practice the opening so that we stay within the time limit. We only have 15 minutes, including questions from the tutor afterwards.
Yes, timing is important. When we practiced last week, we spent nearly 6 minutes explaining the background, which didn't leave enough time for the comparison.
I remember. We should probably rehearse each section with a timer. That way, we'll know whether any part needs to be shortened before the presentation.
Agreed. Another thing I noticed is that some of our slides contain too much text. People will end up reading instead of listening.
I was thinking the same. We could replace a few paragraphs with diagrams or simple charts. For example, the graph showing the increase in renewable electricity generation is much clearer than describing the figures in full sentences.
Exactly. Visuals should support what we're saying rather than repeat it. I'll simplify the graphs and remove any unnecessary labels.
What about the conclusion? At the moment, it only summarizes the main points.
Perhaps we should end with a recommendation instead. We don't need to argue that one technology is always better than the other. Instead, we could explain that the most suitable option depends on local conditions such as climate, available land, and long-term investment.
That's a much stronger ending because it reflects what the research actually shows. Different regions have different priorities, so there isn't a single solution for every country.
Exactly. It also demonstrates that we've evaluated the evidence rather than simply reporting it.
Before we finish, is there anything else the tutor mentioned that we haven't addressed?
She suggested we should make better links between our sections. Instead of moving abruptly from one topic to another, we should use short transition sentences so the presentation flows naturally.
That's easy enough to improve. We can add a brief sentence before each new section to explain why we're changing focus.
Good idea. Also, let's avoid reading directly from our notes. If we know the material well enough, we'll sound much more confident.
I agree. I'll prepare a few prompt cards with key words rather than complete sentences.
I'll do the same. That should help us maintain eye contact with the audience as well.
When shall we meet again to rehearse everything?
How about tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the library seminar room? That gives us an hour before we see the tutor.
That works for me. We can do one complete rehearsal, make any final adjustments, and check that the slides display properly on the presentation equipment.
Perfect. I'll bring my laptop, and you can bring the updated slides. If we notice any problems, we'll still have enough time to fix them before the meeting.
Great. I feel much more confident now that we've organised everything properly.
Me too. We've narrowed the topic, divided the work fairly, and agreed on a clearer structure. I think the presentation will be much stronger than our original plan.
Thanks for your help today. I'll send you the revised slides this evening so you can review them before tomorrow.
Excellent. I'll check the references, update the comparison table, and email you any final comments tonight.
Brilliant. See you tomorrow morning.
See you then. Hopefully we'll be completely ready for the tutor's feedback session.
That is the end of Section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.